Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Swirl Metasearch webinar. We're really happy that you could join us, and it's my pleasure to turn things over to Sid Probstein, the creator of Swirl Metasearch.
Thank you so much, Eric. It is great to be here. I thank you all so much for coming out. Very briefly, we're going to cover a couple different things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is Metasearch and why it matters. I'm going to do a nice demo as promised. Then I'm going to talk briefly about the features and benefits that you get from Metasearch. And finally, we'll go through some use cases and customer examples before I invite my colleague Jason Temple to talk a little bit about M365 integration and how that works. If you use search in the enterprise, if you're a fan of search, if you rely on search boxes, you probably aren't surprised by this statement. It still takes far too long to get the information we need to do our jobs, to make decisions, etc. In every facet of our lives, we're frustrated by browser tabs, in particular keeping far too many open, but there are some other kind of subtle information problems that have cropped up in the last few years. How do we harness the valuable internal data that we have variously strewn across the services and platforms and systems we've used over the years? How do we get important information that would help us talk to prospects or customers? How do we get that in the hands of our sales teams? How do we automate the process of doing research, exception handling, particularly things like customer service cases that are complicated? And if you're a data scientist, you maybe don't feel the tab problem as deeply, but you certainly are waiting a long time to get labeled unstructured data for the machine learning projects that have been heavily inspired by, well, all of the generative AI over the last few years. And the reason that these problems are still here, they're not new, it's a lot because in the last few years, the enterprise completed its move to cloud, and the cloud favors silos. It's very easy in the cloud to do one-click indexing if you have a pile of JSON or a database. And that's why, just as one example, I've heard from a global consultancy, they have more than 500 separate installations of a search engine, different versions, right? Over the years, it was a hammer and they've driven a lot of nails into a lot of data sets, but there's no way to search across all of those. And the idea of putting them all together, it's an impossible problem simply because of all of the schemas and entitlements. Another point, not everything's in the enterprise anymore. The email was consolidated to Microsoft 365 along with a lot of the files. The knowledge bases and help desks have been consolidated to ServiceNow. The CRM systems, even if it's in 50 accounts, is consolidated into Salesforce. And there are services like Snowflake and Slack that are also incredibly important and loaded with rich information. You can't get a copy. You'd need the service underlying it to make sense of it. And so this is why we have too many browser tabs. And it's why it's really hard to be systematic, to go to every silo, to each tab, log in, remember how to search, find documents, figure out which ones are relevant, store them, look at the others, and then eventually pick a few. We spend more time gathering than analyzing as a result. And again, that's not a new problem. What is new is that we can take a technology approach previously that was kind of difficult to get leverage on, AI-powered Metasearch. Today, it's actually a game changer in the cloud. For starters, it integrates with search APIs, and almost every enterprise service has them. Second, it doesn't copy or require you to re-permission any information. It only searches with existing entitlements, things that already exist that already have permissions. A key point, good Metasearch adapts the query for each source to make sure that it has a good chance to fulfill the user request. Not every repository is super smart, like say a Google programmable search engine. It might be a database that really requires very simple input. So Metasearch has to handle that. The last point, maybe the most important, use AI to re-rank across sources. Large language models, the underlying technology in generative AIs like ChatGPT, are able to contextualize most any data. They are a universal reference, if you will, and they do it out of the box. Now, that sounds pretty good, but you might worry about the security angle. Well, Metasearch fundamentally observes the zero trust model. As a result, is really enterprise grade. There's no uploading, copying, or indexing. You don't have to put any data in it. Swirl Metasearch only connects to existing APIs, doesn't want to move any data. It doesn't have any way to accept your data. So existing entitlements only. As of version 2.0, Swirl includes OAuth 2. It's built in. You can hook it up to your existing identity providers for all of the authorization and authentication you need. And last, Swirl is open source. Source code available under the Apache 2.0 license. It's built on the Django ecosystem, one of the most popular portals out there. You can easily tailor this for your environment with hundreds of plugins. And not to put too fine a point on it, Metasearch is about moving the query, not the data. So when some user or system needs information, it creates a query inside of Swirl. Swirl sends that query out to each search engine, database, API, whatever's out there, adapting it as it needs to. And then it returns results, unified re-ranked results that can be consumed in, as you'll see, you can use the new Galaxy UI that's included with Swirl 2.0, but you can also easily hook that familiar JSON up to your existing user interfaces. So users don't have to learn something new. And you can add source information, add results from almost anything into your existing workflows. Before I get into the demo, I wanted to show you briefly the open source project. It's really there to help search developers, data scientists, and engineers create cross-silo solutions without moving data. There are connectors to all of the popular open source repositories like Elastic, OpenSearch, and Solr, databases like Postgres and Google BigQuery, and numerous services from nlresearch.com and Miro to Atlassian, M365, and more. As mentioned, it's all built on the Python Django stack, so you can easily extend it. And most importantly, it includes some of the best open source capabilities out there like Spatie and NLTK to re-rank results and give you the best so you don't have to go from tab to tab. But don't take my word for it. Let's take a quick look. So here is the new Galaxy UI. I can verify that I'm logged into Microsoft M365. So I'll be able to access all of my personal Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint, etc. I'm going to start with a simple search on Enterprise Metasearch. We're going to let that run. It's going to go across all of the sources I have configured. Now, we use Swirl at Swirl. And so it searches my M365 plus a number of other engines that we've set up, including Google PSE, a database of company funding records, our issue tracking system, and others. You're also going to see some commentary from ChatGPT. So let's start there. I'm actually just going to make this a little bit bigger. Right in the middle of the result, we do have a connector to ChatGPT, so you can send the query over. We kind of treat the result that you get from ChatGPT specially for one simple reason. It's not necessarily going to be truthful or accurate, but it might be interesting. So we put it here as a summary, a sort of a comment on your query. But I can of course scroll down and see what else came back. I have a source facet up here on the left that tells me I got results from OneDrive files, Outlook messages, and 2 Google programmable search engines that we've pre-trained. And here I'm going to find information about, so here's an email about a white paper, some of the different blog posts in document format and a PowerPoint slide. Here are some results from the web. This is, I think, from our website, Swirl Today, as you can see here. A video, which we have extracted some of the text from. So here we found a transcript. And as I continue moving through this, I can very quickly visually see that as the evidence of my search term becomes more and more in the body, less in the title, the exact phrase isn't there. And as the hits move to the right in the sentence, in English, right, a sentence is about what it begins with. So as it moves to the right, you'll see that it drops in relevancy rank. I can, of course, fully page through the results. I can select any single silo if I just want to look at my messages. I can also switch modes if I want to see the latest dated items, or perhaps I'd like to see the best from each result, kind of a nice way to get the best from each silo. So here I see messages, files, and enterprise search, and a strategy consulting, all pretty interesting stuff, pretty relevant, and it took just a few seconds. Here's another interesting search on relevancy ranking. This will also hit my default topics. It's going to bring back a few different things, though. For example, we get a nice summary from ChatGPT. Here I can see that I have some results from a pay service, nlresearch.com. Northern Light is one of the most high quality providers of search. They also have of any kind of content. They have amazing search that actually I started my career at. I don't want to say how long ago, but a shout out to all the Northern Light folks out there. So we have results from that if we wanted to take a look at sort of public discussions, right? High quality news about relevancy ranking. If I want to get more of the internal view, I could look at my issue tracking system. So these are things from the Swirl U-Track, and here all kinds of information about what we're working on, improvements we're making to relevancy ranking, and problems we're having with relevancy ranking. But anyway, we won't dwell on those. Now, another idea, I was curious about how ChatGPT is potentially impacting things like enterprise search. Now here, I'm going to start my search with a tag. Swirl supports tagging of any source. You can tag it with essentially what it knows about. So for here, I'm saying go search the news sources for ChatGPT enterprise search. I'm interested in the impact that it might have. So here we can see some pretty typical results from a search vendor who's talking about how they've built their own generative AI. Here we'll see actually Azure offering the ability to feed corporate secrets to ChatGPT. That's pretty darn relevant. And as I slide down the result list, you'll see that these are all pretty good and definitely interesting to ChatGPT and how, for example, natural language or search might be about it. Now, I want to pause real quickly and mention the real power of Swirl is the re-ranking of the results. Most importantly, it's a contextual re-ranking. So Swirl's large language model knows that natural language and search are closely related. So that's why result number 8 is ranking as highly as it is. Now we can do a lot more with tags. It allows the user or any kind of system that needs to query different sources by category to specify those sources with a tag. So here I'm going to do an interesting search: social media company Facebook. Now, this is an example where I've essentially said the company in this search is Facebook. So if there are repositories that have information about companies, you should pass just the search Facebook to them. Don't give them the whole search. It's the database, not a search engine, and it might not be able to retrieve it. And as we can see, we actually pulled up, I'll make this a little larger. Our first result is from Google BigQuery. It's a table of company funding records that I found on Kaggle. And we can see that Facebook raised a pretty large financing round some time ago, along with some other data about the size of the company and its location. In addition to that, we have lots of information from all the other repositories that responded about content, social media. So we see some things about, our growth plans and marketing stuff that we've been working on. And we'll probably see a bunch of stuff that's not as relevant, right, coming back from other sources. But we can see here some good mentions of Facebook in social media topics. So I think it's doing a nice job of finding what's really most relevant to that query. And again, adapting the query so that a not so smart database that isn't investing, let's say, in query processing can actually make sense of and still participate in this query. Now, I love Swirl and I use it every day. One of the searches I do most often, quite honestly, is I use the UTrack search to take a look at different bugs or issues or features that we're working on. So here very quickly in just 1.5 seconds, across our 2 different UTrack installations, we have both issues and articles. I get the best results from both. We've done a nice job of really plumbing out the very rich information that's present in UTrack tickets. So here I can figure out which one of these makes the most important, is most important for me to look at. I could also refine it. So for example, if I say, how does this matter for M365, it's probably going to bring me back a far smaller list of results. Now, perhaps the last thing I'm going to do today is focus on searching for my some of my internal things that I'm supposed to take up housekeeping issues. So when it's time for me to do my expenses, I search my OneDrive for expenses, and it will very quickly bring back not only the expense reports, but here are my actual PDFs. And then there are some other things related. So we'll see, for example, all kinds of material related to expenses, which could include, for example, employee agreements, as we saw, and it could include, any kind of legal data that's around that's in the drive. Another item is I can target my Outlook, and in fact, I could say messages if I wanted, and just search through multiple message systems if I had that set up. And here I'm going to search for the upcoming Haystack webinar. I'm going to be speaking with Charlie Hull from Haystack on Thursday at 11 a.m. And so here we can see some of the promotional activity, some other stuff about Haystack that's coming up, and we'll also see, various other mentions of it. There's not a ton out there, obviously, other than our own desire to promote it. Finally, maybe I'm interested in the intersection of worlds. Tell me about Quirky, which is the open source query rewriting system, and Swirl. Is there an intersection between those two things? Now, ChatGPT admits it doesn't know too much about it, and I don't particularly care for being referred to as decorative fabric or trimming. I suppose Quirky probably doesn't either. But here we found their homepage more or less immediately because we actually have it in our Teams chat. The enterprise search programmable search engine found our developer page, which mentions it. And then we're going to find lots of other information about Swirl and Quirky right onto the video we could take a look at, where we'll actually see our discussions about Quirky previously. So I won't go ahead and pull that up since we don't have time to do that. So very briefly, Swirl Metasearch provides everything you need to build cross-silo search solutions and integrate them with your existing workflows and user interfaces. It includes a no-code query integration model. You create a thing called a search provider. We actually have a wonderful video about that, which we'll post about if you want to check it out. Simply by filling out some JSON paths and a handful of simple parameters, you are quickly integrating with any range of search APIs. And we include APIs as well. So if you want to manage our system, you can automatically create search providers, searches, and even retrieve results programmatically. It's all designed to be used as an engine and built into any number of different systems and solutions. Swirl includes pre-query, query, result, and post-result processing pipelines. You can essentially create a Python list of stages. It will run through them. Those stages will improve the query, the result, or the post-result. For example, relevancy ranking is a post-result processing stage. Swirl lands all of the data, which specifically means just the queries and the responses that we get back from the search engines in SQLite 3. You can actually modify that to use any Django storage backend. The system includes full query parsing and adaptation based on NLTK. We match on word stems. The system has configurable hit highlighting of the actual matches, so including, for example, punctuation or unusual spacing or other non-alpha characters. The results come back delivered in relevancy, date, or round robin order, so-called stack order. We'll keep it in rough relevancy order, but take the first result from each source and then the second, et cetera. So you get a sort of cross-section of the best results. Duplicate detection, potentially very important, by field or by cosine similarities. You can set a threshold and say if they're more than 95% similar, just drop the more similar ones. A subscribe mode, so you never have to run a search twice. You can simply receive updates on a regular basis. And there's an expiration service in case you choose for any reason that you want your search and result objects to age out. You can even set it up so that they aren't stored at all if you want a completely locked down environment where there's no record of search. The benefits of Swirl and Metasearch generally are these. You solve cross-silo search problems in a fraction of the time and effort. There's no copying, extracting, indexing, remodeling, or repermissioning any data. You don't have to bring up a lot of new compute, and you certainly don't need a multiple or a large fraction of the original source data allocated to do metasearch. You can also use Metasearch to monitor multiple sources in real time, provide notifications, alerts, even the actual data. Maybe you just want the JSON. Anytime anything changes without building a new index. Also, if you've worked with enterprise search indexing engines before, adding a source can be difficult, especially if you have to extend the schema, remodel, et cetera. You can add a source using Metasearch to existing search interfaces in literally an hour. It might take longer end-to-end for your deployment, but it shouldn't take long to set up the integration. Then you can integrate that with your existing systems and interfaces, again, with a familiar JSON output. It looks very, very much like a Google programmable search engine or any of the Google products. Nothing too complicated. It's all neatly fielded and arranged. Should be very easy to bind to existing UIs. And ultimately, the true benefit of deploying Swirl Metasearch in the enterprise is one search box and one API to rule all those other search engines and endpoints, all those searchable things. You can put this together and then build applications and solutions on top of it, and the users will be amazed at how quickly you solve their problems. Use cases, though, it's not just about one search box. One of the groups using Swirl today is very much about bringing together a set of common enterprise sources like M365, Atlassian, Miro, BigQuery, Solr, and Elastic. Another is building a developer support portal combining multiple issue tracking systems, including Atlassian, UTrack, also GitHub, and they have some open search indexes they'd like to add with that. You can also use the power of Metasearch to do things like news event detection, alerting, and notifications. As I'm going to tell you, Orbit MI, one of the leading maritime intelligence platforms, is using Swirl to monitor news around the world for any vessels or ports that may have developed timely issues and provide those to the operators of those vessels. Let's take a quick look. So this is Orbit MI. It's a beautiful map interface that shows movements of vessels in real time. It's all about performance management. As you can see right in the middle of the screen is the net daily earnings, right, for this particular vessel, Ludlow, which is an example vessel. Now, you can find out everything about that tanker. You can find its speed, you can find how much fuel or bunker it's using, you can see its course, its history, you can determine what kind of weather it's in. You can actually look at its certifications, even drill into the cargo bays and see what's there. But one thing you wouldn't find out previously is if this tanker was, say, stopped by a foreign government or ran aground in a particular difficult to navigate area, you would have to find that out from the news. Swirl, now deployed for Orbit MI, monitors maritime news in real time for thousands and thousands of vessels, ports, and routes. When a timely mention of one of those things occurs, Swirl masters the data and delivers it to Orbit MI's data lake. Orbit then turns it into product data. So you will see a pop-up, for example, both on the website and on the mobile phone when there's a news article that's relevant to your vessel. They have amazing plans to turn this into news feeds, being able to do things like tracking tanker M&A in future. So a very exciting use case and something that I think Metasearch creates even more value by making it so you never have to run a search twice. So you might ask, this sounds great, and I can see on your website at www.swirl today how to get to the GitHub site, and from there you can, in 2 lines with Docker, get Swirl running in 5 minutes. But you might wonder, how do I integrate this with Microsoft 365? And is that a good idea? So what I would like to do is I'd like to invite my colleague Jason to join me now. So I'm just going to rotate my screen a little bit here. So here's the 2 of us. All right. I guess I'm going to be a little, yeah, I'll try to, there we go. I think that's better. Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Jason.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can hook Swirl to M365. And the first thing I want to mention is, in order to do this, you have to be a Azure administrator.
That's correct.
That's right.
That's correct.
So if you want something like this and want to deploy this, it's actually not that hard to do. Getting the software is easy. If you have a large Microsoft, if you're a large Microsoft account, you already have multiple admins who will know exactly how to do this. And the key thing is it's actually under your control. It is not a Swirl control thing. You are granting permission to your installation of Swirl, I should say, to talk to your M365 tenant, right? That's really what we're going to look at.
That's absolutely right. So the experience is the global admin at the tenant, at the customer site, will register an app in their Azure AD. And in doing so, it's just a few pieces of information. It's the app ID, our app, the Swirl app that we're hosting, or that you could be hosting. Be the tenant ID, and it would be a secret between the 2 of them. And so at the end of the day, the global admin has the ability to grant access to his entire tenant space, a subset like a group or maybe a region, or to no one. If for whatever reason they need to shut off Swirl, they can just literally 1 click and the app is cut off.
Right on.
Yep.
Right on. So let's take a quick look. I think you can see right here. So I am the one of the M365 admins for Swirl. Obviously, we're not a big company. Jason's the other. So we got both here. The big thing to start with, if you're doing it yourself, is you go to Azure App Registrations. This is one of the most interesting features of Azure. It literally lets you connect to the new worlds, like Swirl. When you first set up your M365 tenant, it's critical to select the right tenant model, and we recommend using just the Azure AD multi-tenant, but not allowing personal Microsoft accounts. You don't want some random account trying to auth with your backend. So we recommend staying to this particular setting. Now, you'll also set up a bunch of other things like a redirect URI, literally the URL that we're going to be used for the callback. You might need to modify that. But this ultimately, through the app registration process, you're really creating what Jason just mentioned, right? These are the app ID, the object ID, and then I'm not going to show an example, but under these links, we would do things like create redirect URLs, the application URL, and then here's where we would create that shared secret.
That's correct.
It's all pretty much point and click Azure, right?
That's right.
For example, when I add the URI, I don't have to edit a file or anything like that.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're enabling two paths here. So there's the single sign-on event into the Swirl app. So that's one leg of the authorization and authentication. And then once in there, we then speak to the Microsoft Graph API. And that allows us to do the much richer, deeper searching into OneDrive, into SharePoint, into your Outlook. And that,
without extracting everything.
Without extracting
That's
everything.
right.
Exactly.
So actually here on the screen now, it's another part of the app registration, is that as the admin, you have to grant the Swirl installation permission to the different graph APIs. So it starts with a very simple interface where you pick the graph, you pick the individual APIs. Ultimately, these are the APIs that you can authorize Swirl to access. You can also grant permission for across the organization if you're the admin. You can also leave it so that each individual user will have to consent. Literally at the moment that they log into Swirl, as you saw, there's a little profile button, and I can click the Microsoft button to authenticate. If you choose, you can have each user approve this access to their calendar and their mail. So that's a choice that you make organizationally each time you deploy it. And finally, once you have all that stuff set up, you're going to take these, a number of codes. This is one example. You'll take this application ID, and you're going to have to put this into the environment where you're running the search. So here you can see that client ID is plugged in. After you've installed Swirl, you're going to go into the search provider endpoint, which is where you actually configure each search provider, and you're going to activate it, right? So here at the bottom of that screen, all I have to do is go in and change active to true, hit put, and it should just start working.
That's correct.
Now tell me again, I just want to make sure I don't miss it. When this is set up, the access to the M365 tenant, that's totally under the tenant's control, right? It's not the Swirl installation is pulling the data.
That's correct.
And it's not making a copy. It's only using the graph APIs.
That's correct.
To query what's there.
And it's whether or not the customer is hosting Swirl themselves and permissioning it themselves, or whether they're using the Swirl Cloud, which we host also in Azure, of course, to provide to our customers. Either model, it's the global admin who can turn it on, turn it off, adjust the granularity of how to select the permissioning model.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think this is really the key. Access to M365 is possibly one of the most important repositories between the email and the OneDrive. It has incredibly valuable, crown jewel type of data. And so we take that very seriously. And the goal of Swirl is always to be enterprise grade, and the control, the access is 100% under the deployer's control. So that's why we did this, and we just wanted to cover that. Thank you very much, Jason. That was excellent. Very well. All of that, after you've done the login, then you'll have that power to search across all those repositories. You can add all of the open source, your internal applications, and over time, we're going to roll out many, many more repositories. It does not take long to do a search API level integration. We plan to release a variety of new services, from ServiceNow to GitHub to almost anything that's out there in the enterprise. We'd love to hear from you. Anything that you would particularly like to see us support, we'll put it on the list.